You know that moment when you see a message come in and for a second, you consider replying right away, but something in you hesitates? Not because you don't care, not because you don't want to respond, but because it suddenly feels like more than just a message. It feels like a small demand, a shift in your mental space, and instead of answering, you close the app, telling yourself you'll come back to it later. And then later turns into hours, sometimes days. From the outside it looks simple. People assume it means disinterest, or avoidance, or even rudeness. There's this quiet expectation that communication should be instant now, that if you have your phone in your hand, there's no real reason not to reply. So when someone doesn't, it gets interpreted as a signal, a lack of effort, a lack of care. But that interpretation misses something important, because for a certain kind of person, replying to a message is never just replying to a message. And that's where this starts to make more sense. The people who tend to struggle with replying aren't necessarily disconnected. In many cases, they're the opposite. They're often more aware, more sensitive to tone, more attuned to how something might be received. And because of that, a simple response doesn't feel simple. It feels like something that has to be done properly. There's a quiet pressure to get it right, to respond in a way that reflects what they actually mean, to not come across as too cold or too distant or too much. And that pressure, even if it's subtle, creates friction. What looks like avoidance on the surface is often hesitation underneath. There's some research in cognitive psychology that helps explain this. The brain doesn't process all tasks equally. Even small decisions can create what's called cognitive load, especially when they involve social evaluation. When you're thinking not just about what to say, but how it will land, how it will be interpreted, what it might lead to next, your brain treats that interaction as something more complex than it appears. So instead of being a quick action, it becomes something your mind wants to postpone until there's more space, more clarity, or more energy. But that moment rarely comes in a world that's constantly asking for your attention. And over time, this creates a pattern. Messages come in, you notice them, you care about them, but you don't feel quite ready to respond, so you delay. And the longer you wait, the heavier it feels. Because now it's not just a reply, it's a delayed reply, which carries its own kind of weight, so the barrier gets higher. What's interesting is that this pattern often doesn't come from a lack of social ability. It often develops in people who have learned, over time, that communication has consequences. Maybe they grew up in environments where saying the wrong thing led to misunderstanding, or conflict, or subtle shifts in how people treated them. Maybe they became used to thinking things through carefully, choosing words with intention, reading between the lines, or maybe they simply learned to associate communication with responsibility. That once you respond, you're now part of an ongoing exchange, and that exchange requires energy. So the nervous system adapts. Instead of reacting quickly, it pauses. It waits. It looks for the right moment. Not because it's avoiding connection, but because it's trying to manage it in a way that feels safe and controlled. And this is where it gets misunderstood, because from the outside, delayed responses can look like distance. But from the inside, they often come from a kind of internal overengagement, a tendency to process more, feel more, consider more. It's not that the message doesn't matter. It's that it matters enough to feel like something you have to approach carefully. At the same time, this pattern isn't without its cost. The same awareness that makes someone thoughtful can also make simple interactions feel heavier than they need to be. The same tendency to reflect can turn into overthinking, and the space that was meant to create a better response can sometimes create silence instead. There's a quiet paradox here. The people who care about responding well are often the ones who struggle to respond at all, and the more they delay, the more they're seen as the opposite of what they actually are. But none of this makes one way of being better than another. Some people are naturally quick to respond. They think out loud. They process in real time. For them, communication feels fluid, immediate, low pressure. Others process internally first. They take in the message, let it settle, shape a response more slowly. For them, communication is something that requires a different kind of pacing. Neither is more correct. They're just different ways the mind organizes interaction. What matters is understanding the pattern, not judging it. Because once you see it clearly, something shifts. The hesitation starts to make sense. The delay stops feeling like a personal failure. It becomes something more neutral, a reflection of how your mind processes connection, not a measure of how much you care. And there's something else here that often goes unnoticed. People who move this way, who take their time, who don't respond instantly, who think before they speak, tend to bring a certain depth into their interactions. When they do respond, it's often more considered, more aligned with what they actually mean. There's intention behind it. And while the world tends to reward speed, there's a quiet value in that kind of presence. It just doesn't always get recognized in the moment. So if you've ever found yourself staring at a message, wanting to respond but not quite doing it, it doesn't mean you're indifferent. It doesn't mean you're incapable. And it doesn't mean something is wrong. It means your mind is trying to manage something that feels, to you, a little more complex than it looks on the surface. And that complexity has a reason. If this felt familiar, there's probably more about the way you think and respond that follows the same pattern. Not just in messages, but in conversations, decisions, even the way you relate to people over time. And once you start noticing it, it becomes easier to understand yourself in ways that don't rely on assumptions. There's more to that than it seems.